331. Slavery and Human Nature. Chalcedon Report number 145, September 1977. We are often told that men everywhere have a natural love of freedom and justice. Again, it is held by many that no slave really loves slavery. I have read several savage attacks on a liberal historian's study of slavery, which upsets critics greatly, because it seemed to imply that many slaves in the Old South were content with slavery. I have heard scholars say flatly that this is impossible and contrary to human nature. This is the key. Are slavery, tyranny, and injustice contrary to human nature? To believe that they are is to believe that men are naturally good and naturally just and free. This is, of course, at the heart of the liberal faith, but it is contrary to the biblical view of man's sin and depravity. Men have rarely loved freedom and justice, and very often, when claiming to love freedom and justice, they are, in fact, working against it. Many slaves were very content with slavery, while objecting to some aspects of it. Most people in the Soviet Union, while ready to grumble about various particular conditions, are, according to some observers, very much content with the basic aspects of life under socialism. In the Western democracies, we have the steady loss of freedom because people prefer other things to freedom. True, here as elsewhere, people would best like to have their cake and eat it too. They would like the advantages of both freedom and slavery, of both justice and injustice, but, in the final analysis, they talk of freedom and justice and choose the opposite. In fact, as George Orwell saw, the new slavery comes in the name of freedom. People talk of freedom, equality, social justice and brotherhood, while busily voting in their opposites. I have known some scholars who became irate at the suggestion that slaves could love their masters, and yet these same men could idolize some of our recent presidents who have been ushering in the new slavery. For more than a generation at least, US presidents, all put into office by a majority vote, have been actively furthering the new slavery to the usual applause of the majority. The new master gains more adulation at times than the old massa ever did. When the president asks the people to tighten their belts, it is in order to enable the federal government to untighten its belt and get fatter. But the slaves, despite regular grumblings, basically ask for more slavery. As Christians, we cannot begin to cope with the problems of our time unless we recognize that man as a fallen creature is, whatever his profession outwardly, a person who prefers slavery and injustice. He is more at home in such a world. Freedom means responsibility, and the sinner is in flight from his basic responsibility to the sovereign God. Justice means our own condemnation, and what sinner wants that? As a result, men, in the name of freedom and justice, work to suppress the substance of these things. The impotence of modern politics rests on the inability of so many liberals and conservatives to recognize the nature of the problem. The success of one great humanist, Napoleon, was based on his recognition that his earlier views of man as naturally good, just and free were false. The Reign of Terror and the Egyptian campaign brought home to Napoleon the depravity of man. Accordingly, he did what others have since done. He used the facade of the revolutionary movement as a means to power. Freedom and justice will rise and fall in terms of man's faith. Where men are regenerate and live in terms of God's law, freedom and justice quickly become imperatives. Where men are reprobate, the facade of freedom and justice becomes basic to the new slavery. A faith without consequences is no faith at all. The prevalence today of myths of consent and equality provides a facade for less and less consent and more inequality. This should not surprise us. The remedies men seek, political and social action, organization, legal battles and more, are all impotent unless, at the same time, we recognize that the basic problem, the sin of man, must be also and first dealt with. The foundation is the sovereign and regenerating grace of God. Man is the problem, not his circumstances. Man's circumstances are a consequence and product of his slavery and injustice. The redemptive purpose of God is a total one, and all our activities must be seen in the perspective of God's purpose. As Dr. Cornelius Van Til has pointed out, the redemptive revelation of God had to be as comprehensive as the sweep of sin. Redemption must, in the nature of the case, be for the whole world. This does not mean that it must save every individual sinner in the world. It does mean, however, that, quote, the created universe, which has been created as a unit, must also be saved as a unit, end quote. Cornelius Van Til, An Introduction to Systematic Theology, page 133. Our faith thus gets to the root of the problem, the nature of man, and it has a total solution for man in the world. It does not declare that men are free, but rather that they are slaves, and that only the truth can make them free. John chapter 8, verses 31 to 34. And the truth is Jesus Christ. John chapter 14, verse 6. Only then are men turned from loving and believing a lie. Romans chapter 1, verse 25. Revelation chapter 22, verse 15. Into men whose lives are founded upon the truth. All our problems, political, personal, or otherwise, are, at their root, theological. Until we recognize the essential problem, man's revolt against God, and the answer, faith and obedience to God's law, we will be providing only facades for the new slavery, and we will ourselves be whited sepulchres.